and welcome to Why Zero Trust is a Hero Strategy. Today's webinar is sponsored by CrowdStrike and produced by Actual Tech Media. And if that wasn't enough fun right there, CrowdStrike has brought along two awesome friends, Okta and Zscaler, to join us in our discussion today. My name is Jess Steinbach, and I am so excited to be your moderator for this conversation because Zero Trust is absolutely fascinating, and partially because of potentially all the various understandings, maybe even misunderstandings, the different definitions and approaches. I, like a lot of you, have heard more and more about Zero Trust and why it's the answer. But, and I don't know if you feel this way, there seems to be some gray area around the actual what and how. And that's really the key part of all this, right? So I can't wait to dig in with our three expert speakers today. We're going to talk about what Zero Trust actually means, how it applies to all of you, the problems it can help address, some potential mistakes, maybe some missteps and what we can learn from them, some success stories and how we can emulate them. And we will explore some truly innovative solutions from CrowdStrike, Okta, and Zscaler. So basically, this is going to be one awesome day. Now, as you just heard, there's a lot of information to cover here. And I'm sure you're just as excited as I am to get started. So I'm going to cruise through a few housekeeping things and then we can dive right in. Okay, moving our slides along here. First, I want to draw your attention to the questions section of your webinar console. Now, the absolute best part of these webinars is the chance to ask questions directly of our expert presenters from CrowdStrike, Okta, and Zscaler. And keep in mind, if we don't get to your question today in the live session, don't worry, the teams will be following up with you after we wrap. And hey, since you're already in that question box, why not say hi, introduce yourself to the other awesome and inquisitive folks who are here with you today in the audience. If there are any technical issues, knock on wood, of course, that come up today, something like a slide not working or audio or video things, first try a quick browser refresh. That usually does the trick. But if not, shoot our team a message in that questions console and we'll be there to help you out. Okay, so now if you're following along with me in this little intro walkthrough, and I know that you all are, then you will have seen the handouts tab right there next to the questions tab. Go ahead and click into that handout section. You're going to find some very exciting resources to go along with the webinar today, including some infographics, blog posts, data sheets, white papers, and more. Really fascinating stuff. So for all you info-hungry humans out there, be sure to explore that handout section and download some great content to share with your friends and colleagues after the webinar today. All right, and with that, we have come to it. It is time to get rolling. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce our three expert speakers here today, and I'm going to bring them in to the camera with me here. All right, so Larry Kowalski, Federal Director for Sales Engineering at CrowdStrike, Stephen Kamey, Director of Product Marketing, Public Sector at Okta, and Hansung Bae, CTO for Public Sector at Zscaler. Larry, Steve, and Hansung, thank you all so much for being here with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
Thrilled to be here.
All right. Well, I wanted to let you all know that because we have so many awesome experts here with us today, we're going to try something a little bit different. Instead of just a straight presentation with one speaker at a time and the slides going, we're going to go a little bit more free-flowing, kind of a discussion, maybe get to some questions. We might have some slides. You know, we're just going to make this up as we go. It's going to be great. So hopefully you're all up for an adventure and you're willing to come along with us on that. All right, guys, you all ready to jump in?
Let's go.
All right. I love it. The enthusiasm is there. Okay. Well, I always think that the best place to start a conversation is by building that shared foundation. Now, we're all hearing more and more about Zero Trust, and there's a lot of different definitions floating around. You know, it's sometimes referred to as a solution, maybe a strategy, maybe it's an approach or a set of guiding principles. So what actually is it? maybe we can start with some level setting. You know, what does Zero Trust mean in the context of our conversation today? And Steve, I think you're going to start us out.
Now, Jess, be honest. The first time you heard Zero Trust, what was your reaction? It's like, what is this, right? It seems like another buzzword. But we've come obviously a long, long way, haven't we? So
Yeah,
what I was going to say is, now that, when you contrast it to where things were, right? I worked in the late 90s at a large bank, right? And you think about, pre-Zero Trust days, which was, hey, as we're connecting things to the internet, we build walls. We put a firewall up, and then we try to build additional layers of security. And the goal was to try to keep everybody out, the bad guys out of the organization, and to protect the internal networks. And I think we've realized over decades of breaches that model does not work. So what happened over time, and obviously we could get it. We're going to get deeper into the structure here of zero trust. But the general concept is that we cannot no longer assume that anywhere inside the network is safe. And in fact, we should look at all of our applications as though basically they're directly connected to the internet, right? Our internal networks are no more secure than our outside networks. And I think that to me is like the fundamental concept around zero trust that kind of drives the fundamental thinking and the shift from the old days to a true zero trust architecture mindset.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a great place to start. And I just want to zoom in a little bit, because the folks here in our audience today, we've got a lot of the state and local government and education. So, does something change? What are the different considerations or applications that we should be keeping in mind? What's the main problem that zero trust is going to address in these industries?
And when I think about the zero trust, Jess, I think about the modernization of cybersecurity. Right, and there's a lot of great information that's come out in the past couple of years to help organizations, state and local, really develop their zero trust strategies. For me, it's not legitimate until the National Institute of Standards and Technology comes along and publishes something, and they did. It's NIST 800-207, the zero trust architecture. They've outlined what zero trust is, 7 core tenets of zero trust, and so forth. So for a common definition, that's usually my starting point, whether I'm talking to federal agencies, the Department of Defense, state, local, education. It's a great way to just have a common set of ways of thinking about zero trust. The other thing that was exciting to me, Jess, was when the executive order came out for the federal level, right? That basically said, hey, look, all federal agencies need to adopt zero trust architectures. Right, that was May of 2021. And as we all know, state and local levels tend to look towards the federal level and see what they're doing, right? And how are they approaching cybersecurity? So I feel like there's a lot of things that state, local, higher education, everyone can learn from sort of the path that the federal level is setting. One of the outgrowths of that executive order was the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency put together the zero trust maturity model. And what was great about that, there's limitations, right? It's not perfect. I think we all agree that there's places that it can improve. But what was fantastic about it is that it put together a simple 5-pillar model and a simple way of thinking about an organization going from a perimeter-based to an optimal zero trust architecture. And I think what I'm saying in terms of the simplicity of it, right, it actually gives a pretty decent set of things to accomplish in each of those 5 pillars. And just for the record, put out the pillars there, right? Because I think it'll help frame the conversation here. Things like identity, device, network environment, application of data, and all of that stuff being underscored by things like visibility and analytics, automation, and governance. So again, I just put that out there because every level of government, state, local, higher ed, even everyone can benefit from these best practices and ways to begin a zero trust journey.
I love that. Hansung, did you have something you wanted to add to that as well?
Yeah, I do, Jess. Oh, you know what, Jess? My computer's going to reboot with a forced update here. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
You scared me.
I'm just kidding. So, but that has happened to me in the past. So I always reboot my computer. So pro tip, before you go on a webinar, reboot your computer just in case. The one thing I'll say is this. There is no such thing as zero trust. So I know that's kind of controversial. We're talking about zero trust, and I just start out by saying there is no zero trust. The last zero trust that really worked was, cone of silence on Get Smart, and we know how that ended up. So the idea of zero trust that Steve just talked about is limiting your blast radius to as small a impact as possible, right? Because, if there is somebody who's hell-bent on doing you harm from inside, your job is to make that as minimal as possible. And that's what actually zero trust accomplishes today, right? And the other thing I'll say is that the concept of zero trust, and I'm going to move my slide here, actually started in 2004. This was called the Jericho Forum. It came about 18 years ago, but technology wasn't there. We couldn't do what the Jericho Forum think tank said we should do. Everything that Steve just mentioned was brought up during the Jericho Forum and since that point on. And you'll see that now technology has changed. And I know we talk about zero trust, everybody's zero trust. And, the one thing I'll say is if you do a Google search for zero trust, you can actually get to Google page 11 and still find vendors and people talking about zero trust. So it's a very hot topic. It is something new, but it is based on something old. That's why I'm wearing something blue and I don't have anything borrowed. So that's the end of my analogy there. But as you go through this presentation, the pillars that Steve talked about, I'll break it down even simpler. Think about where your users are, your device, your application and data. If you can protect that, you're golden, right? Because everything else plays a kind of a supporting role. Now, if there were a lot of networking folks and say, hey, you just left me out, what's the deal? And I'm a big infrastructure guy. I've been doing networking since the dawn of time. But networking is the fabric that ties everything together. Nothing happens without the network. That's why it's important. But to do segmentation from the network, that's the wrong place because networking is utility. It's the fabric and it's supposed to unite everything, not segment things, right? The other way to look at networking is it's like breathing. When's the last time you thought about breathing? But if breathing stops, all hell breaks loose in 30 seconds or less, right? So think about networking as the unifying fabric. And if you protect your users, devices, application, and data, you'll be good. And Zero Trust will help you build on that foundation to protecting that. Okay, so Jess, back to you.
Yeah, now I'm really thinking about I'm overthinking my breathing now. So thank you for that. I'm just going to hyperventilate quickly. Okay, well, I think that's great. Sorry, before we move on to our next question, Larry, did you have anything you wanted to add to kind of how we zoom into SLED here? No? Can we hear Larry? I can't tell if Larry's very pensive or muted.
Oh, no, there we go. Yeah, it's a rookie mistake. So I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you. So wrapping up, the initial part, back to your original points, right? What is Zero Trust? So when I look at it, Zero Trust is a set of principles. That's it, right? It's very easy to dig into the, 11 pages of Google searches of products that are out there. When you look at it, you take a step back from the vendor spectrum and the products and technologies that are out there. And there's many fantastic ones, including all three of us that are here. But you look at it, it's the principles that are going to guide an architecture to achieve an outcome, and it's that simple. And a lot of these items are intertwined with one another. So it's really I find it helpful, and certainly our customer base finds it helpful when you look at it in that light, and really don't try to separate many of the things that we have going on within our environments, because with something like Zero Trust, a lot of those ideas and concepts and technologies, frankly, are intertwined.
Well, and that's a great place to kind of dig in a little bit, because you just mentioned that we have 3 different teams here today. We have CrowdStrike, Zscaler, and Okta. So why are all of you here together today? And I'm going to add a little spin question to you as well. So why are you here? But then also as individuals, what are you most excited to bring to this conversation to talk about today? Larry, let's start with you since we're on you.
Yeah, fantastic. So, when you look at, and we discussed a number of the different frameworks, right? We talked about NIST, and we talked about some of those other ones out there. When you look at CrowdStrike and Okta and Zscaler, really what we're doing is we're adding a layer, and we're adding, really a modernization layer to some pretty old concepts. So when you look at, the use case, the main use case for Zero Trust is you have a person along with a gadget or a credential along with a device, and they're trying to access a resource. When you look at things like, whether that resource lives in the cloud, whether that it's really, pretty irrelevant where the resource lives. The perimeter security model is largely gone, right? We discussed that earlier. So when you break down the process of a credential and a gadget trying to access a resource or data, CrowdStrike from a device health perspective, from an identity risk score perspective, Okta from an identity risk perspective, and then really Zscaler from a modern networking point, circumnavigating VPNs and back channeling, and really taking wherever the resource lives, where an industry is largely work at home, the complementary manner with which CrowdStrike, Okta, and Zscaler achieve that fundamental goal of getting from a resource or to a resource from a gadget or a device, leveraging a specific credential. We really do that in a frictionless way, and the complement of our technology really helps to shed some light on solving the problem rather than digging and expanding on technology stacks because it sounds good, right? We're actually solving the problem. So, thank you. Back to you.
I love that. Okay, well, Hansung and maybe we'll go to you next, and then Steve, you'll wrap us up. What are you guys excited about being here today?
Yeah. So if some vendor comes to you and says, "Hey, I have the zero trust solution," and the good thing about the CISA, the DoD, and all NIST, all these models, is you have so many to choose from, right? But if one vendor says, "I can do it all," kick them out. They're lying. So no need to do business with them. It takes multiple silos, multiple vendors, multiple specialties to pull off a true zero trust strategy. And kind of an oxymoronic thing about zero trust is that it doesn't work if you sprinkle it around. You have to be all in. In order for zero trust to work, you have to implement it wide. You have to cast a wide net so that you can protect the resources that we just talked about: users, app, devices, apps, and data. And Larry just, hit on this, but there are no barbarians at the gate anymore. They're inside. Okay, like it or not, they're inside. And your job is, again, to reduce that blast radius. And the reason why I'm excited here is because, we talked about how Jericho Forum was 2004. We now have the technology to actually do this at scale, right? And I want you to think about this phrase as you go through and watch this webinar, is that in a world of zero-day attack, that's the new vector, right? Everything, assess yourself from a zero-day attack framework. And in that world, if you are reachable, you are breachable, right? That's kind of the mind-blowing part about this. We've already had that at the operating system level, browser level, firewall, VPNs, you name it. We've all had those zero-day attacks. So think about zero-day attacks and zero trust helping with that. And the key part of that, again, is if you're reachable, you're breachable. So think about that. And to answer Chris's question, no, Zscaler and CrowdStrike are not competitors because we wouldn't be on a webinar together. We help different parts of the journey of that packet as users use that application. Okay, so Steve, back to you.
Yeah, Hansung, I think you put it well in terms of the solutions obviously need to work together, right? I think we all know it's, obviously zero trust is not any individual product. It is the integration of solutions that work together. I think the thing, Jess, that makes me most excited is that when you hear zero trust, it feels like a massive heavy lift that's going to be really, really expensive. And you know what? It's actually just the opposite. When you start taking a zero trust approach and you start adopting these best of breed solutions, you can actually do it a lot more efficiently and effectively, right? And it actually reduces the cost of doing all of this over time. So I think that's one of the things that's really kind of powerful when you really look at a zero trust architecture that not only helps you become more efficient and effective, Hansung, pointed out the ability to do it at scale, as well, doing it security that's more reliable and so forth. But it even goes into improving things like end user experience and so forth. So I think that's the thing that excites me the most, right? When you hear zero trust, you get past the eye roll and you really start thinking about what zero trust brings, the benefits that it can bring to your agency, your organization. That part really needs to be emphasized.
I love that. And you're right. The getting past the eye roll, that point at the end, I think is a really strong one. And Hansung also mentioned, besides the barbarians are in the gate now, which I love. That's really sticking with me. As we said earlier, there's barbarians running all over your house right now. So I think, one of the things with that eye roll that comes up, and Hansung, you mentioned earlier that page 11, kind of idea. So we're hearing about zero trust more and more. That's come up all the time. Why, what has changed? Has anything changed? Or is this just, that kind of marketing trend or curve, or what's bringing this more to top of mind?
Yep. So, those of you in infrastructure and networking and in security, we've tried the segmentation for the last probably 20 years, right? It started with VLANs. VLANs didn't exist in the original Ethernet, so we added it on. It was a bolt-on thing. Turns out it didn't really do what we wanted to do. Vlan hopping came immediately after VLAN. So these new networking-based technologies that we tried didn't work, right? Let's just come to the table, admit it. It doesn't work because network is the entry point. It's the fabric that I talked about. It's precisely the wrong location to try and bring this concept of trust, right? This protective bubble around the user and the application. And here's another proof point. Ethernet, when Digital Intel Xerox invented Ethernet, they did not trademark the name Ethernet. That's how they wanted it to be open for everyone's adoption, okay? And so to say that we could do this from a network standpoint was a huge, gigantic mistake. But you know what? You go to war with the army you have, not the army you want. It's what we had. It was ubiquitous. It tied everything together. You could see the user, you could see the app, you could see the data. So of course it made sense to try it at the network level. Hence why we have page 11, page 12, page 14, because every vendor overnight changed their marketing to be zero trust. It didn't matter what technology you're in, you're zero trust, right? It's a hot term. Everybody jump on it, get on that gravy train, and that leads to that eye roll. So the first litmus test, okay, that you should is this a network-focused solution? Because if it is, it's going to be pretty darn hard to be zero trust. It's something new. So if you could have done it with the networking that's been around for 30 plus years, local area network I'm talking about, then of course you would have done it already. You wouldn't be on this seminar. You'd be hosting this saying, hey, I solved it using the network as a basis for zero trust. And so my contention is that you cannot do it from the network. And I've been doing this a long time at scale. And that's why zero trust is now something new. I know we have a lot of things that come around. Software-defined network. Remember how hot software-defined network was? And the joke that I tell people is that SDN was doomed from the get-go because there was a technology, very similar sounding, that came even before that called ISDN. And ISDN eventually was supposed to change the world, data connectivity. And the term ISDN was known as it's still doing nothing, right, in terms of making money for vendors. And so when SDN came about, the first thing I said was, you based your name acronym on ISDN, is still doing nothing. And it was prophetic. It was still doing nothing. Software-defined networking, as we knew it, really didn't achieve the promise. Again, the eye roll, right? I understand that. But as you learn about zero trust, you're going to see, wait a minute, I can disaggregate the user from the network. Think about that. You can take the user off the network and yet provide that protection, the protective bubble, all the way from the beginning to end, right? And why do we have this 3-vendor seminar here? Because, every kiss begins with K, right? That's the commercial that K jewelers have, right? Every kiss begins with K. It's catchy. I like it. But every transaction starts with identity, right? Everything starts with identity. That's why Okta is here. But what do you use to access that? The network. It needs protection. Well, Zscaler can provide that protection and provide that HOV lane from the user to the app where no one can look in and no one can look out, right? Zscaler is in the business of creating that HOV lane, bespoke HOV lane at scale for every user, every app. And of course, what else do we need protection? The end device, because that's where you're banging away and that's where you're working or on your device. That's where CrowdStrike comes in. And the one thing that I'll say that's different than, we tried these approaches before, is that the agents are no longer doing all the hard work at the local device because it bogs you down. Cloud first security is often talked about. But again, the litmus test there is if you're doing all the work at the agent, then you're just bogging down your laptop, your desktop. In a cloud first security model, the agent is very lightweight and all the burden of doing the work happens in the cloud, okay, where you have elasticity. So keep those things in mind and kind of judge zero trust. How zero trust are you through those principles that I just talked about? Okay, Jess?
Awesome. Okay. So lots of good sort of solutions and outcomes that you started to brush on, and we'll dig into them a little bit more down the line. So, hopefully everyone's on board that zero trust is a good thing to be considering. And I actually want to bring back, Steve, that point that you made. I love that. I think people feel maybe overwhelmed by the totality of it, and it's a holistic approach and strategy and guiding principle and whatever else we define it as. But, maybe taking some of those pieces apart, and I want to dig into that a little bit more. What are, and maybe Steve, if you want to kick us off, and then Larry and Hansen can jump in, what are the obstacles right off the hop? What are maybe some of the early either mistakes or sticking points that are hitting people that might be preventing them from jumping in on zero trust?
Yeah, it's a great point. And, Hansang said that you need to be all in on zero trust. And he's right. You need to be all in on it, but that doesn't mean you need to do it all at once, right? So, for example, I pointed out the CISA zero trust maturity model on purpose because it's a really, really simple way of taking a big problem like zero trust, splitting into 5 simpler pillars, and then putting some key actions around each one. So Hansang pointed out that, Okta, our business is about managing identity. We're about managing access, right? So we have to have that centralized view of identity. And that's actually one of the biggest challenges that a lot of organizations face is, in addition to things like assets and so forth, it's just, how do I know all the different identities that are even out there, right? To begin that whole zero trust journey, right? And pairing that identity with the actual device. So I'm pointing that out because when you take a look at things like centralized identity management, integrating things like risk signals from the devices into the authentication process, or even things like attribute-based access control to kind of tie into what Larry was talking about with connecting individuals with specific resources. These are some of the things that sort of float to the top of things that are identity related, that not only Okta accomplishes, but also leverages the insight and the capabilities of, solutions from CrowdStrike and Zscaler. Right, so we talked about the importance of taking these 3 solutions that cover a great deal, of the zero trust architecture and having to make sure that they actually work together. One of the things that I tend to recommend always at the state and local level is, take a page out of the federal playbook. I think we all know that, the federal government has a federal zero trust strategy that's since evolved from the executive order, and they actually mandated 3 things for the identity pillar for every single federal agency to follow, and it's great advice for everyone at the state, local, higher education level to look at first. Can you centralize identity, right? And if you can get that centralized view of identity, can you start taking a look at integrating things like those device risk signals, right? Can you do that, right? And if you can accomplish that, and also in putting in place things like phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication. At the federal government, they have PIV CAT cards and things like that, but they also acknowledge that there's a lot of technologies like WebAuthn that leverage things like biometrics from devices to help make sure that the person using that device is the person who they claim to be, right? So when I take a look at those 3 things, right, those are 3 starting points that anybody, any organization can take that kind of advice and start acting on it. Does that make sense, Jess?
Yeah, it absolutely does. I appreciate that. And I think it does help to be able to pull out. I really like the point you made at the start. You do need to go all in, but you don't need to go all in at once. So you can start to kind of take one step at a time. I have more questions, but I want to kick it over to Larry as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jess. So one of the areas that I think that whether you're a practitioner, security administrator, architect, one of the areas you want to keep in mind is not getting bogged down. We've talked about a lot of, in my space is the federal space, a lot of the frameworks that are out there. There's multiple. There's NIST. There's the Department of Defense. There's a lot of different frameworks out there, and those are all excellent pieces. Those are all excellent. They're just that. They're frameworks, and I think that really a bit of advice might be use that as your ground truth, right? But that's not everything. Those frameworks, especially in the federal world with NIST, a lot of times they'll come in, they'll be 18 months, they'll be 24 months out of date. And that's not a bad thing. It's just, the timeline with which we those types of documents and frameworks are updated, they tend, in the world of cyber, in the world of some of the events that we've seen, and you look back, a lot of times there's this notion of a 2.0. So you don't need to you use those frameworks as a basis, but really you take into account the problems that an individual organization is trying to solve, and you can add and implement and build on top of those frameworks. And I think that's really, really important, because when you look at things and you look at some of the most recent attacks, maybe going back a couple of years, we don't have to go into ancient history of NAC and Ethernet, although I love those stories. You look back as to exactly, and actually what happened. I refer to the SolarWinds and related attack and some of the sunburst malware and activities associated with that, and you look at what actually happened there. You look at the inability of existing security solutions to even pick up on the telemetry that a signed and sealed, certified, piece of software just skips half the kill chain and shows up with credentials in your environment. And really, the inability at large for organizations to see that, that's a problem. So that's where EDR comes in. There's no reason or magic or secret why EDR, endpoint detection and remediation, showed up on the executive order. And then you move into why some of those attacks were even made worse than maybe they would have. And that's really when you dig into the identity and can we rely on that identity? So I guess the point of all this is, when you go look at, should we be trusting the software that's running in our environment? We absolutely should not be trusting the software in our environment. And you don't really find that on too many frameworks. You see application wrapping and things like that, but just because it's a SolarWinds, which is a fine company, a piece of software released by a vendor that's signed by another vendor's digital certificate, is absolutely no reason to trust it. So we shouldn't be doing that. When we go and we have authentication requests and we're leveraging credentials and we, two-factor it with a CAC or PIV card, does that mean we should trust that credential? And we absolutely should not trust that credential. Though that just validates that we achieve two-factor authentication, but that doesn't look and examine whether those credentials or identities have been involved in what ended up being a golden SAML insertion attack. So I mean, there's a lot of these angles that you look at, and the frameworks are a fantastic start. But when you actually look at, and it's helpful to do a post-mortem on the activity. And that's, you see the executive orders and you see zero trust become hot in the last couple of years. It's because of these items. It's not because, the vendors come up with a new technique or a new tagline and we're pushing product. We looked at exactly what's happened within the industry and what organizations, corporations, and governments have been affected by, and we're trying to respond to that.
And, actually, I want to ask you a quick question about that. When you look at the different vendors that have been coming up, and you guys have all mentioned that, I think, Hansling, you had a great thing if somebody tells you they can do everything, get rid of them. They
away.
Can't.
Exactly.
Run fast, run far. So let's talk about vendor hype. And if for somebody out there that is making decisions about new technologies and trying to figure out what is going to be the best solution for them. Now, obviously, we have three great options here in front of us, but how are they approaching that? How are they making that decision, and how can they maybe cut through some of the hype to get to the reality of what's going to help them the most?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll kick that one off, and it's one of the items that we chatted about, before this seminar. And really, when you look at this, a lot of times we have the propensity as practitioners and with industry to stovepipe or silo projects, initiatives, things like that. So when you're looking at your endpoint load and your endpoint protection, when you're looking at zero trust and getting a hold of identity, and you're looking at some networking concepts, and how we access cloud workloads remotely, working at home, and some of the things that have become popular in the last couple of years. Although they might be separate projects, although we might call them different things, all of those types of projects are interrelated. So I think really the jumping point is to look at the links, to look at where those types of activities and those processes overlap one another, and you work towards the most frictionless way to have the integration of the technologies to allow, again, the technologies are there to alleviate the burden and to solve problems. They're not, the technology is not there just to have technology there. So really, when you look at this, you weigh the outcomes that you're looking for, and you look at the technologies that are going to deliver those outcomes with the least amount of friction, and it helps to think about those outcomes and those processes holistically, and not stovepiped into, oh, this is our zero trust initiative. It couldn't possibly have something to do with our endpoint and gadget security posture. It couldn't possibly have something to do with our network architecture. Well, it absolutely has to do with all those things. And really, when you join companies with like Okta and Zscaler, along with CrowdStrike, that's where we can achieve maximum value in terms of the elimination of the friction associated with delivering those outcomes.
Okay, Steve or Hansung, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I got something, Jess. So those of you who are baseball fans, you might have heard the term five-tool player, right? This is a player that can do so many different things. Derek Jeter comes to mind. I live in New York. Derek Jeter, one of the greatest players in baseball. Prove me wrong. We'll do that we'll take that offline. But a five-tool player is so valuable. Yeah, because I just threw down the gauntlet, all you Red Sox fans. Is that you're good at many, many things, right? So we kind of touched on this earlier. So when you're cloud first, let's use some examples, right? CrowdStrike, Zscaler, and Oktas of the world. The hard stuff, the things that change, right? Larry already talked about Zero Trust 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, NIST. There's, revision after revision after revision that comes out in pretty rapid succession too, because, the enemy footprint is changing. So we do need to adapt. So if you buy something and you have to rack and stack and you deploy it, that's okay. But now the onus is on you to keep up. You have to patch it. You have to touch it. You have to manage it. You have to provision it. So you don't, unless you have that much time in your hands, I don't know about you, I don't. So cloud first means that when you have a Zscaler agent or a CrowdStrike agent working together, for example, all the heavy lift of keeping up with the Joneses, all the changes are happening in the cloud. The burden of maintaining and updating that infrastructure happens on the vendor, like CrowdStrike, like Zscaler, like Okta, to make the product better, and you reap the benefit automatically. And in this fast-paced world of cybersecurity, I don't know that it's possible to say, I'll do it. I'll roll up my sleeve. I'll buy this. I'll buy that. And I manage it. So one of the questions I believe was, what's a good way to differentiate vendors? Find out how much work you have to do to maintain that security posture. Because I'll tell you this, what's worse than having no security? Having bad security. It gives you that false sense of security, thinking, I got this, when it's really kind of decrepit and it's out of, it's not updated. But you get that confidence, false sense of confidence, because you have bad security. I'd rather not have security, because at least you're freaked out and you're motivated to do something about it. So don't fall into that kind of the trap of, I can do this, I can manage it, I can put my hand around it, I can rack and stack it. Try to get out of that thinking and evaluate companies that are cloud first, so that they can grow and change on your behalf, right? So that's one of my advices that I would say.
Steve, anything you want to add?
Yeah, not to mention we can do it in a lot of ways more securely, too. So, when you talked about the vendor, the vendor fluff and stuff like that, I'm in marketing. But what I do when I talk to the government customers, for example, is, it's one of the reasons why I pick out the best practices and things, because I don't want to create FUD, right? I want to say, hey, look, this is the way our solutions work in the context of things that you need to follow. So when we put the material out there to help people understand how things work together, we make sure that we put it in the context of that. But I think the other point, that we haven't touched on is, all three of us vendors, right? We're actually looking to, we look at the federal government requirements for things like cloud security, right? Like Okta, we achieved our FedRAMP moderate authorization. I think there's reciprocity with state ramp as well there. But the idea is that, we build an environment that's, meets the FedRAMP moderate already. We're in process for high, right? So that's one of the ways that, it's one of many ways that organizations can put trust, in the organization, is being able to go through a rigorous, authorization process like that. So I just thought I'd just, kind of point that out. That's, it's along the same lines, Hansing, of what you were talking about. Not only can we in the cloud manage it better, but you can also do it a lot more securely and with more privacy as well.
Actually, we did get a question. Would the approach be any different if we're looking at hybrid cloud? Does that change any of the applications here?
So I'll take that first. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. No, I was just going to say, from my perspective, right, the organizations can choose for themselves the approach that they want to take. And maybe Hansing, that's what you were going to say. And the idea that a solution is like in the cloud doesn't necessarily mean that it won't work with things that are on premises. So for example, the authentication, this is the centralized identity that we do, connects from cloud to ground, right? So if there is still, and plus there's still a lot of legacy technology that things need to work with. So it can be a hybrid cloud, it can be a mix of on-prem and so forth. And I'm saying, I apologize if that's what you were about to say.
No, it's so we did that verbal version of a hallway. You go this way, no, you go this way, and so some of you got that. But the hybrid cloud. So I was actually waiting for someone to bring this up, because the thing about zero trust, we're not talking about internet and malware and phishing attacks. That's a whole different class of problem. Zero trust is about your workload, your stuff, whether it's on premises or in your private cloud, cloud to cloud, hybrid clouds of the world. That's what zero trust protects. So hybrid cloud, and I would say, is requirement of implementing zero trust, right? Because if you have no data on premises, if you are 100% SaaS shop, which I don't know how many of you, in the state, local education department fall into that, very few. Zero trust is about private workload that's residing on premises. And in the state world and local government, we have a long tail of homegrown applications, right, that are many and also dangerous, because it's using older technology that you may not have the luxury of patching, right? Because the system is that it's going strong, but it's old, and so you can't patch it. So you need to protect that with a kind of a bubble wrap of zero trust, right? So especially in the state, local area, zero trust matters, whether you're using hybrid cloud or not. And on the education side, zero trust comes into a different frame of reference, right? So the lens. So why do I say that? In education, a lot of people say, it's a student's thing, I'm not going to protect anything. Well, guess what? A lot of education in the university world, you do research. And who do you use in that research? Undergraduate students, right? Because they're cheap labor, right? Let's face it. And it gives them experience. So now you have your crown jewel, your research project, that's dependent on what kind of security. Are you still going to say, well, it's a student's laptop, it's students, we're not going to touch that, we're not going to deal with that? I think a lot of that is because there was no technology to help with that. So people kind of like pretended it didn't exist. But now zero trust says, no. We can have that one student worker, 10 student worker, 100 student worker, an international researcher helping you, give them direct access to your application to be able to maintain that zero trust. And I'll show you this slide, okay, so that you can see this slide. So this is a very common hybrid cloud scenario, right? You have workloads in the cloud, you have VPNs, you have firewalls. Do we really think that Colonials of the world didn't have a firewall? Target didn't have a firewall? Is that why they got hacked? Of course not. The problem is that in this static world where you have firewalls and VPN and the security that we know, security that's served us the past 15, 20 years, there's a fundamental flaw to that. And that is my tagline. They're all reachable from the internet. And if you're reachable, these firewalls, VPN, by definition, they're reachable because the first packet of a TCP SYN doesn't have identity. Okay, so some of you who do packet analysis for a living, TCP SYN SYNACT, that's just knocking on the door. And with zero-day attack, just that knock on the door can leave you vulnerable, right? So again, whether you are in hybrid cloud, cloud to cloud, on premises, think about zero trust as that protective HOV lane per user, per app at scale. And because you're not reachable, guess what? You can't be breached, right? So those are some of my thoughts on that topic, Jess.
Larry, I want to kick it over to you as well. I don't know if you have something you want to chat about with the hybrid cloud in particular, but we also got a question here that I know is part of one of CrowdStrike's mantras around the edge. So we have someone wondering about edge or perimeter threats. So what he says is this discussion on cloud first applies only to network threats, correct? Edge or perimeter threats are still possible, which can bring down the network, malware on USB, for example.
Yeah, so I mean, just capping off what we were just talking on, I think multi-environment. I mean, that's table stakes to be considered in terms of any zero trust architecture, right? Whether it's a government furnished laptop, whether it's an on-prem server as the origin, a BYOD electronic device, or a cloud workload living somewhere, it really doesn't. That can't matter. Right, and the pathway that it takes to, and whether the resource we're trying to get to lives in a public cloud, private cloud, an on-prem data store. Again, really, I think that's table stakes. So, I'll actually show a slide as well. We're going to go ahead, and this is really again an architecture slide. So this will really try to help. I mean, obviously, this is a CrowdStrike slide, so CrowdStrike is in the middle of the universe here, but really, this signifies the gadget, right? And with that gadget comes different levels of endpoint protection. It's already been mentioned, everyone has firewalls, everyone has antivirus, everyone has, you name it, lots of different security stuff, out there. So really what we want to do, and CrowdStrike's mission is to help simplify that. That's really, driven by the cloud, but certainly, those on-prem laptops and government furnished equipment, absolutely we need to protect that. And not only from the gadget level, right? Whether it's a GFE, furnished equipment, mobile device or laptop, or whether it's a server, not only from the gadget level, but also from the identity level. So you look at here's the core of what CrowdStrike does, whether it's cloud workload, whether it's a machine. We protect certainly in a number of different ways that we can do that. But then really, these are the resources, right? Gets back to that multi-cloud environment, whether we're public, whether we're on-prem, whether we have our own virtualization and on-prem, Kubernetes clusters and things like that, to get from the point, the access level, right, of which we're protecting a couple of different ways. We run through to get to these end assets. We run through, multiple enforcement points. At the end of the day, we have whatever the endpoint or the workload is, absolutely seamless and frictionless integration, not only with the identity providers that you see up in here, but also with the delivery mechanism, the service edge, really. And that's what Zscaler brings. Okta brings in the identity piece. So really to have a native, seamless, frictionless integration from the origin point and checking all those, the trusting nothing along the way, right? The operating system or cloud environment that we originate from and the credential that we originate a request from, we can't trust any of that stuff. So we need to look at that. We need to double, triple check our work, dot our I's, cross our T's in terms of the access layer here, in terms of the credential or the identity here. And then really, that's a two-way back and forth street. So to have that frictionless process in two ways, it really doesn't matter where the origin of a threat starts, or it really doesn't matter the destination. It could start out in this cloud area, or it could start internally. It really, any type of relevant zero trust architecture not only has to take into account the service edge, the identity, as well as the gadget, but also the multiple enforcement points along the way. So it absolutely is table stakes to be 100%. Considered even a zero trust player in this day and age. You have to be able to fit a lot of different architectures.
I wonder if there's anything that you guys would differentiate at all with. We did have a question specific to education and the commonplace with BYOD, bring your own device. You were just chatting about that a little bit. I wonder if there's anything that you want to dig into a little further in how that might apply to education, or if you feel like we've covered it.
And BYOD is, that's difficult, not only from a holistically speaking, because the different vendors, right, whether it's an Android mostly Android and iPhone devices, iOS devices out there. When you're the hardware and the software vendor, Apple makes it a little bit more a little bit more difficult. But that being said, we have a number of different ways: MDM solutions, mobile device management solutions, along with what CrowdStrike does at the actual gadget level. Does an awful lot in terms of not only, are we configured correctly? Are we at the certain levels? The vulnerabilities are they addressed? But really now taking the tenets of an EDR and the ability to actually inspect the activity that's actually happening on the gadget, right, before it even leaves the gadget, is really, one way we would address that. And then also, again, keeping in mind, there's that frictionless checking, I dotting and T crossing in terms of, again, not only the identities that the gadget's using, but also the pathway. So whether it's a mobile device or whether it's a laptop, it really, again, it's table stakes, and you have to be able to hit all those. If you come in and there's not a good story for pretty much most scenario out there, then it's probably not or I guess it's an incomplete story at best in terms of delivering zero trust.
Yeah, just the one thing I'll add is that because of the pandemic and everybody going home to work, BYOD became more of kind of an annoyance to it's critical. And Larry kind of mentioned that because it's BYOD, because you don't own it, because you can't install something, it is challenging. So one way to address it, for example, is we have, at Zscaler, we have a clientless zero trust in a Chromium-based browser. So the idea is that if it's webified application, well, fat clients are out because, again, to use a fat client, you have to install something, and that's, that doesn't work in a BYOD environment. So in a browser world, we can say, all right, you're going to this site. I will put a protective HOV lane inside that browser so that you can have access to that resource, but nothing else, right? So you're inside that sandbox, if you will, of that browser, and we're protecting that traffic, and we're keeping an eye on things. And other technique that we can bring to bear, for example, is browser isolation, where I'm going to let you view the website, but something's a little fishy, whether we get the signal from CrowdStrikes of the world, if it's a GFE, if it's a government laptop. But in a BYOD, again, those telemetry may not be there. So we determined that, hey, something's a little bit odd here. I'm going to take you to browser isolated, where essentially you're getting that streaming website, right? So you're not actually interacting with the website. You think you are, but you're not. There's a Zscaler in the middle, and that's just streaming the web page. Think of it as like watching a web page as opposed to interacting with it. But I agree, the BYOD is but again, you are limited, right? Because you don't own that device, right? So.
And then from the identity perspective, we can still apply things like multi-factor authentication, right? We do something Absolutely. As simple as SMX tests. Obviously, we don't really want to go that way. The better way is to have a policy and say, hey, you download something like Okta Verify, right? To use the push notification that combines with biometrics. But, that works with BYOD, right? That you would decide for yourself, right? Where what the right risk level is and what the second factor ought to be. So I thought I'd just point that out from a BYOD perspective.
Mm-hmm. Looping back to the gadget level as well, I just want to be abundantly clear. So certainly from a government furnished or GFE furnished equipment, we have an awful lot of capabilities on the gadget as well. And then when you dig into bring your own device, we definitely still have the ability in that lightweight capacity, just a little bit different ability. So in either scenario, working again, this is in a complementary fashion, right? CrowdStrike does not replace an MDM solution. In fact, we leverage MDM solution to actually deploy the very light footprint that we have on those gadgets. So with that, we have depending on whether it's BYOD or not. At the end of the day, we're providing the device hygiene score, if you will. And that hygiene is really the first step along the journey, and then in conjunction with in Okta, we provide that identity risk score, if you will, and then the combination of the two. Those are two enforcement points in and of themselves. Then we rely on the actual, the service edge or the access piece, which would really be Zscaler. So all those technologies, working in conjunction with one another. That's what makes it smooth. That's what makes it seamless. Just want to make and leave no doubt that even in a BYOD scenario, you can't say it's table stakes to be able to adjust to these environments and then not be able to help cover the environment. So I just want to add that one point of clarification.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, while we're still kind of chatting about the potential obstacles that might be in somebody's way, I think the one that always comes up, and we've gotten a few questions about it today, is going to be cost. And actually, there's a great question here that I'm going to read out, maybe just to get us started, and then we can kind of expand and talk about cost saving in general. So Jaideep is asking about a CISO report that they had read, and it says mid and small organizations are most vulnerable as they have lots of sensitive data, but not the resources to protect it. So what cost-effective suggestions do you have for such organizations, maybe nonprofits, that might be collecting social security numbers of their clients, especially, and this is key in these types of smaller organizations, as staff training is not high on their list?
Yeah, so I'll take that first one. So that's a DLP workflow, right? So if it's sensitive, strip it out, block it, etc. So that comes. So again, going back to that 5-tool player approach to zero trust, one of the things that you can do is scan for data at rest or data that you're using, doing deep DLP sandboxing of the world. It's not so it's part of the zero trust play, but it's more data in flight, data at rest. Kind of. So it's a slightly different technology that you bring to bear. The other one is that because it's SaaS, what we're talking about is a SaaS solution, and deploying a CrowdStrike agent, deploying a Zscaler agent, for example, isn't hard because it's a time-tested, any number of ways that you can use to deploy a package to it. It's pretty seamless. The managing is actually pretty simple in that, the mechanics of doing the policies is easy. What's actually hard is what policy are you going to implement? So in a small environment, you actually have a leg up on giant bureaucracy because in bureaucracy, you have analysis to paralysis. You have everybody who says, I want to do this, that, and the other. 8 months later, you still don't have a policy that you can implement. In a smaller shop, you're the cook, chef, and judge, right? So you say, I'm going to have an easy win by blocking or limiting access to my HR application, to my this application. You could do that en masse very, very quickly. So it doesn't actually cost a lot of money nor training, because once you have that policy, the actual, it's click and drag type of setting up policies. So it doesn't take that much to maintain it, because again, you're not maintaining infrastructure, you're maintaining just the policies, right? So think about that. And again, this is why cloud first tools helps quite a bit.
And I was going to mention and saying that they're probably managing it all today, right? And it's extremely expensive to try to do it now with this legacy, right? And it's obviously what you were talking about in terms of adopting the cloud, right? For the various applications, there's a lot of them that are already have like FedRAMP authorizations and so forth, right? So when you adopt the cloud for all sensitive information, you get it out of trying to manage it, right? Manage the applications, patching, and all that other stuff, configuration management. You offload all of that, right? The smaller organizations might have the most to gain, from the efficiencies that can be gained from the cloud. And that's one of the reasons why, Okta, like for example, we've got something like 7,000 pre-built integrations with applications that are out there, right? So like that way, when you go and adopt a multi-factor authentication type solution, you just literally choose, right, the additional apps that are there. Right, your policy decides how different people get in, but I think that's what we're trying to say is by adopting the cloud for these workloads, for the important data and so forth, and then applying these zero trust solutions that we just talked about. For example, Okta in this case, right, for the authentication piece, it also actually helps drive down costs dramatically. I think probably the initial thing is just how do we transition. Right, there's a lot of different grants programs that are out there, especially for the state and local level, to help them begin that transition. But once they do, they're going to see those long-term gains.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll say, I'm sorry, just real quick, is that the question was the cost-effective suggestion do we have? Well, think about what the cost is of not doing it, because many a small business has gone out of business because malware and they got attacked and they have no backup. They don't have the way to recover without paying an exorbitant amount of money for the ransom. So think about not just the cost-effective way of adopting it, think about the cost of not adopting it. Go ahead, Larry.
Yeah, and hence saying that's exactly where I was going. So absolutely, you know, what we coming from and having worked with an industry for a good long time, you know, really one of the ideas, and you know, moving to a cloud-based solution. You brought up a lot of good points in terms of security, and a lot of the vetting has been done. But you can't underestimate, you know, when you know, coming from the world of on-prem solutions and pizza box appliances and things like that. Really, you know, in those types of setups and those type of architectures, you know, at least half your time, sometimes even more than half your time, is spent being a maintainer of the system, of the architecture, rather than a user, right? And whereas you're only, you know, able to the goodness of the solution, what it provides, you're only spending half your time on that. So that's one way to look at things. And then also, when you look at different cloud solutions, certainly CrowdStrike is really, you know, we have at CrowdStrike, we have what's called a business value analysis, where we'll help customers walk through the different costing models, right? If you have an incident, what does that cost from start to finish, right? How long does it take you to respond to an incident? And so really we come up with, you know, the capability to allow customers to see, you know, what the cost of operations, what's the cost of interruption of operations can be. And then it allows you to look at it, you know, with some education around, you know, you know, I mean, security is a risk mitigation business, and you know, all of a sudden it becomes a funded thing, and everyone likes to talk about security when something happens. And you know, in your planning stages is really when you should build security in from the beginning, when no one wants to talk about it, and it's a cost center that people are trying to avoid. That's when you should have the security conversations, and some of those value analysis of what, you know, why should we do this, can certainly be helpful. And you know, really take that into consideration, and that's something that, you know, any vendor that has the ability to adjust and that has shifted their operations to the cloud, we're happy to help point that out.
Larry, let me ask you a question about that, and then if the other folks want to join in as well. The difference of approach, if somebody's, you know, sort of blank slating, and it's hard to imagine a blank slate security system or strategy anymore, but versus somebody that's got some legacy issues that they're trying to improve or build on. Is there a different approach that you would suggest, or different pitfalls or different things that they should be looking for?
Again, I think that's really when you look at this, you need to understand, you know, it's, you know, like in kinetic warfare, cyber warfare is very important. You absolutely need to understand your adversary and what you're working against, but you also need to understand yourself, right? If you understand what your capabilities are, where your weaknesses are, because you know, any organization is only as strong as their weakest link. So that's incredibly important to figure out what those are. I think, again, it's table stakes. A solution like CrowdStrike, as well as Okta, as well as Zscaler, whether you have a lot of legacy baggage, we can certainly help eliminate some of that. You know, realizing full well that you know, some potential legacy baggage, that's part of a workflow and part of a process. So really, don't shortchange the process, the evaluation process of what that is. And then the other thing to think about also is, you know, if you're starting from scratch, or you have you're not confident in your team's ability, there's, you know, certainly as in the vendor area, I think I speak for Okta and Zscaler, certainly CrowdStrike, you know, finding you know, qualified and maintaining and nurturing qualified people and keeping them around is always tough, right? Staffing challenges, staff augmentation, a lot of the different ways, because we take the notion and the operation, the brains behind the operation is largely cloud-based solutions. CrowdStrike offers a number of different operating models as well. Everything from a complete hands-off model, where it's fully managed, into, we'll help you in some of that part and work in conjunction, and oftentimes, certainly in the federal space, embed with your teams to help some of that expertise, some of that methodology, and some of that process to rub off with your internal staff. So I think really not only is it, flexibility in terms of the technology and how that integrates either from scratch or with other legacy architectures, but also the manner with which that the service can be delivered. You need to be able to adjust to a lot of different environments, and when you have these cloud-based architectures, it really makes it. And then some of the service offerings that we also bring to bear. It really makes whatever flavor we need to fit. It's not always a perfect fit, right? And our technology is certainly not perfect. But when you look at that, no technology is. But when you look at the totality of it, there's between implementation methods, between different architectures, and really the help that we can provide on the back end. Really we offer a way to integrate for pretty much any environment.
Awesome. Anything that you guys want to add, Hansung or Steve?
No, I think Larry addressed it. Yep.
Nailed it. All right. Well, I think we've chatted a lot about obstacles and things that are going to get in the way as people are maybe making these decisions or things they might want to consider. And I want to switch, and as we kind of gear up towards the end of our webinar now, towards that high note. So I want to talk about the outcomes, and what is the, we've talked about what the problem is we're trying to solve, and what is the solution, what is the outcome, and really in particular how we get there with CrowdStrike, Okta, and Zscaler. So maybe we can kick that off with Hansung and then and take it from there.
Yeah. So my first advice is do something. Analysis to paralysis is no good, because the other good thing about SaaS is you can consume and test and kick out very easily, right? Because you're not racking and stacking. You're not buying anything other than just a temporary license, trial basis at that in most cases. So give that a try. Number two is that don't go crazy. I know it seems like it's, oxymoronic advice when I just said do something and then I said don't go crazy. Don't go for that, diamond in the rough type of scenario. The fact is, in a world of zero trust, the usual, the ho-hum, the everyday are the most important, right? Because they're most at risk. So pick a target that you're comfortable with and deploy it widely so you have a good control group. But don't go for that very, very bespoke rule, because you'll get yourself wrapped around the axle. Learn how to use a tool effectively. So start big, something easy, but again, it's deployed widely, so you need protection, and then kind of filter down to the thing. The other thing I would say is sit back and discover. So a proper zero trust tool should allow you to see what the hell's going on. So here's a question for you. If you are going to adopt zero trust, shouldn't you know what you should trust? Right? And I say that, but a lot of you have Active Directory and say, I have Active Directory. Well, that group hasn't been touched in a while. People move and the groups might not have followed the user. There's a lot of things that on the existing identity, the on-premises ADs of the world, where it requires some cleanup. So observe, watch, see who goes what, does what, then figure out how to implement that zero trust. Again, wide net, easy stuff, and then filter down. And keep in mind, all three of us, CrowdStrike, Oktas of the world, the vendors, the three of us, we are no longer the gating factor if you choose to blow it out to 10,000 sites, 10,000 users, etc. We can scale as fast as you can scale, but don't let that be the reason why you deploy it to everybody overnight with the most complicated rules just because you can, right? Learn it and go step by step, because we'll be there when you want to go exponential.
And saying, I was going to just, kind of riff off your point about going and doing something, right? One of the things that, that I guess want to be careful of is, don't dive into zero trust and try to come up with all these, metrics, right? It's really difficult to measure things like cybersecurity effectiveness and things like that. So maybe that's not the best way to start. Maybe take a look at something like, as you're modernizing, take a look at things like cost of ownership, right? And how you can actually reduce costs by adopting some of these newer technologies. So for example, if you're taking identity, you've got it managed in multiple Active Directories across multiple agencies, identities locked up in this application over here, you're handling thousands and thousands of password reset type things. You go and take and adopt Okta, and apply a modern zero trust architecture solution, right? One that focuses on identity and helps drive and secure multi-factor authentication. You can actually track things like how you're actually reducing your costs on things like those help desk calls and, the staffing that's required to do it. So, not to recommend to everybody not to try to track your cybersecurity metrics, but try not to go crazy doing it initially, and maybe pick some of these simpler like business value type targets, and then work towards the maturity in terms of measuring the cyber program. It's just a thought.
Larry, anything you want to add?
Yeah, well, we'll just add a few salient points to wrap up. I mean, really, I think we hit on this in the beginning. There's a lot of publication, a lot of frameworks about zero trust. Absolutely use them. Use them as a guide, right? Rather than the be all and end all. These are living documents. These are living frameworks. And as the technology spectrum and industry evolves, really, the solution set that's going to allow you to evolve along with that is pretty important. The other thing is really, the outcomes that are specific to your organization, right? You have friends in industry and, other companies and organizations are doing this, and really that's we solve the same problems, but really our business processes and the outcomes that we're looking for are a little bit different, the resources that we have. So really to understand that before and after. Here's what we do now. It's okay. We're not really positive that we're doing everything that we can, and what does that before and after picture look like, and really challenge yourself with that. And then really lastly is ask for help. As technology evolves, there's a lot of different ways to implement that. Certainly from a vendor perspective, CrowdStrike doesn't know everything. Zscaler doesn't know everything. Ask for help, and really what you'll find, and I've found over the years, is when you come in and you have a pretty good idea as what your outcome that you're looking for, what the before and after looks like, irrespective of technology, and then you go to the industry and ask for help and merge what you already know. And ask for their help. A lot of times you can figure out for yourself what the best pathway forward is, right? Stay out of the marketing slicks and stay out of the data sheets, although we have some posted here, but really, working and engaging with, engineering staff and, with our three fine companies, there's an awful lot of help that can be provided. So those would be the words of wisdom that we offered from CrowdStrike.
I love that. Avoid all the data sheets, except the ones in your handouts tab. Go click on them.
I mean, data sheets are important, but data sheets is not is not the pathway that you want to take to make decisions in terms of guiding zero trust principles and how you bring those principles to an architecture within your environment. You're actually going to want to talk to people, work with folks, and really more importantly, understand where you're trying to go, and then industry will be there to help you get there.
So that's a perfect segue, and what I'd like to do next is give each of you an opportunity to let folks know how they can get started with your individual teams and solutions. So let's start with Hansung and then Steve, and then Larry, you can bring us home on that one.
Yeah, so it's very easy. So and the tabs, all the contexts are listed there. Again, because it's a SaaS offering, it's very easy to start something out and get going in a matter of days. So not even a day, actually. So you can have a meeting in the morning and you can have an instance set up by that afternoon so you can kick the tires around. There was one other question that I think the three of us should address, which is, why are you better than others? What are some of the things that make us different? So working together is absolutely one of those reasons, right? We don't just have a webinar together. We see Okta and CrowdStrike again and again and again, and customers ask, hey, can you use feedback from CrowdStrike to change your zero trust or the posture for network access, et cetera? The answer is absolutely. Same goes for Okta. The other one is experience. So a good friend of mine once told me something that stuck with me. He said, experience is what you get right after having needed it the most, right? And so when you're running a cloud infrastructure at hyperscale, that experience, OJT, on-the-job training, time and grade, however you want to say it, is important. And my proof point for Zscaler is if you go to trust.zscaler.com, you can see real-world stats on how many transactions we're processing. And here's the kind of the framing lens for you. They say Google gets about 5 to 8 billion queries a day. That's a lot, right? Yesterday, Zscaler processed 220 billion transactions, right? So again, as you're evaluating companies, I think Larry hit on this, think about the maturity of the company that's going to help you, the experience, and where they sit in the marketplace. Because security might not be the place you want to go with a fly-by-night and take your chances because you're taking a chance, right? That's probably the one place where you don't want to take a chance. So pick a company with some maturity, and I think that's a key litmus test that you should bring to the test.
I love that, and let's add that in, Steve. Why don't, for you and Larry as well, give us your next steps and how to get started, but also give us your key unique as well.
Yeah, I love how Hansang was talking about how kind of getting started with something, but also the idea that these are three best of breed solutions that actually really do effectively work together. For example, we talked about taking information from, say, CrowdStrike and factoring that into the authentication decision, right? If you have a risky device, for example, it ought to know the posture. Is there malware on those devices? The operating system out of date before we actually let them into the into a protected resource. So I think when I take a look at zero trust total, and I take a look at some of the simple starting points, again, from a state and local level, I always I recommend just take a look at some of the high level guidance that comes out of the government. It's not perfect, but it's a great way to just start and wrap your head around the initial starting points and sort of check off the things that you're doing effectively and things where you can make progress towards. So things like centralizing identity is such a basic thing. It sounds simple, but it's actually really difficult, especially when you're dealing with things like cross-agency integrations and things. And then adding things like multi-factor authentication, again, you think that that's relatively straightforward to add, but it isn't, especially when you deal with a lot of the legacy applications. So solutions like Okta, we've been built, in the cloud, but we're designed to work with any application, no matter whether it's in the cloud or in a hybrid cloud or even on, a legacy type of technology on premises. So I think that's what you want to look for, right? The solutions that cover a great deal of ground from the federal zero trust strategy, from the general publication and so forth, and make sure that those are the things that are the most important from your risk profile.
Okay, Larry, bring us home.
Yeah, fantastic. So, I'll echo a lot of the same sentiments that that my partners here have illustrated. So, from a perspective of getting up and running as a SaaS-based solution, again, very, very quick, right? Less than a day to get up and running. But really, I would encourage folks to engage with their CrowdStrike team. We have just an amazing. I'm privileged to lead our federal engineering team, but across the board, we have a really strong engineering team. And let's forget the technology at first. Engage with us again. Ask for help. Ask those questions, and in a non-technical way, we can help you outline exactly where you're trying to go. The technology piece will come, and really ask for that help. And in terms of the technology itself, look at the areas where we're weak. Right, a lot of customers, they're continuing to renew the same solutions that they've had for 5, sometimes 10 years, a decade in terms of IT security and cybersecurity. That's like a century in other areas. So really, don't be afraid to evaluate. And the process that you're operating with now could very well be, your outcome that you're looking for could very well be a different process. So that tendency to try and replace one for one, that's not necessarily a good idea. So, really, take a step back, think out of the box, ask for help, and then diving into the pieces to the puzzle where CrowdStrike really shines. That's the crowd in CrowdStrike. When we ask, well, why is CrowdStrike so amazing? Why are you so much better? All that kind of, those kinds of questions that come in. Really, the devil, whether it's our threat intelligence, whether it's our platform and products and capabilities that we bring to bear, the difference is in the data, and that's the crowd in CrowdStrike. So, having the benefit of not only our installation base globally, but also the data, the telemetry, the unobfuscated, without break and inspect on the wire, but really to get that host level, to get that workload data, and to capture it at scale. And that's really, what CrowdStrike started, as we like to say, and that we're the world's largest security cloud. And that's really the crowd within CrowdStrike, and that's what brings us the power, whether that's in terms of activity that doesn't look and feel right on an endpoint, whether it involves malware or not, whether credentials are being misused and or exfiltrated, and really, to take into account all of the activity and leverage the crowdsourcing of data and knowledge from around the world. Right? I mean, one of the things that CrowdStrike does is we take nefarious activity, damaging activity, adversarial activity, and we make it single use. And that's the power of the crowd and CrowdStrike. And when things become very expensive to overcome the defense mechanisms put in place, adversaries tend to move on. That's a for-profit business, and when you make that the tactics, techniques, and procedures that folks attempt to leverage, you make them single use, which in turn makes it very expensive to continue their operations. Folks tend to move on. So I'll leave you with that notion. Thanks, Jess.
No, I love that. This has been so great. And just to lift the fourth wall here for all of you at home, when we first started chatting about this, we knew we had about 90 minutes and we said, we'll probably get to 45 and we'll let everyone go early. And now here we are 80 minutes in and we could probably keep going for another 20 or 30 minutes. So I really want to thank Larry, Steve, and Hansung for coming and chatting with us today. This has just been beyond fascinating. I've been on the edge of all of my seat while I've been standing, but I've been on the edge of my metaphorical seat for the entire session. So thank you all so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, folks. Appreciate the investment of time.
All right. Well, I'm going to send our wonderful speakers off on their way. And with that, I do, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, really want to extend a thank you to CrowdStrike and to their special guests, Okta and Zscaler, for making this webinar possible. I also do want to remind you all to check the handout section. As we just heard, it's important not to get bogged down in the research. You do want to take steps forward. Don't hit that analysis paralysis, but you do need to start with understanding the strategy that you want, and that comes from doing some research. A few of you asked about finding the right vendor, and I think we got some great answers today in that, and it starts with asking questions. So please do make sure that you're heading into that handout section and getting those resources downloaded. If you have any trouble with the handouts, or if you didn't get your question asked today, don't worry, we will follow up with you. You will hear from all of these teams here, and they'll get in touch to make sure that you get some answers. I do want to thank all of you for attending and asking some great questions today. Honestly, these webinars are so wonderful to be a part of because they give all of us the opportunity to connect and explore these new ideas together. And that collaboration, both from our vendors that we had here today, our speakers, as well as from all of you in the audience, is what's going to allow us to keep innovating and growing. I hope you have all learned some really interesting and exciting things about Zero Trust and why it's a hero strategy. And I hope we will see you all again soon. Until then, I hope you all have an absolutely beautiful rest of your day. Thanks so much.